that they successfully persuaded the City County Planning Commission to block 2 rezoning requests from developers looking to build in their neighborhood. I think it's a huge win.
Thank you. Yeah, gentrification, there's a big article about it in the Independent. Thank you so much. Good news.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna, if you could just mute yourself and sing along with Randa, and the words are in the chat box if you want to sing, or if you just want to listen, that's fine too.
Okay. Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on justice. I woke up this morning with my mind just stayed on justice. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on justice. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Now I'm singing and marching with my mind stayed on justice. I'm singing and marching with my mind, stayed on justice. I'm marching and singing with my mind stayed on justice. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Well, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind just stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.
Thank you so much, Randa. Welcome everyone to Tuesdays with Tillis, week number 186. We have been meeting together every week on the street and now on Zoom to resist the Trump administration and everything that it represents. People here for the first time, can you raise your hand and wave it around so we can welcome you? Welcome, and if you're not on our newsletter list, or if you'd like to be on our email list to get the Zoom link, you can just put your email in the chat and we'll be happy to add you. I'm really excited about our topic today, and I've appointed myself as co-founder with Nancy Jacobs of this group. I've appointed myself lead organizer, and what that means is I'm kind of in a boat and I'm navigating according to stars. And the stars are the people who just keep showing up, and 2 of our great leaders who've been with us from the beginning, Elena and Cliff, have really been 2 of those stars, and they really made this happen today. Cliff, it was his idea, and Elena invited one of our speakers, Mr. Pittman, and I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Cliff Charles, who is truly a star that I navigate my thinking by these days, and a great friend to me and to Tuesdays with Tillis. So, Cliff, it's yours.
Very good. Good morning, everybody. This is Cliff in Durham. And can you all hear me?
Yes.
In good shape? Very good. Excuse me. Well, our topic today is activism in the movement for Black lives. And as we all know, this past spring, the killings of Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd by members of law enforcement community refocused our nation's attention on the ongoing problem with the killing of unarmed Black people by the police. People all over the nation and the world marched and protested in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. We witnessed an outpouring of support for the movement from young and old and people of various racial and ethnic backgrounds, resulting in the single largest protest movement in the history of the United States. However, the movement has not been without its challenges and its complications. For instance, a relatively few individuals and groups with unwholesome motivations and violent actions have infiltrated the Black Lives Matter movement and allowed it to sometimes be miscast in the media. The president has attempted to sully the movement and provoke violent confrontations between protesters and his secret police. I refer to those secret police as gangrene, while also portraying himself as a protector of law and order. Now, locally here in the Triangle, we have some dynamic individuals who are actively involved in pushing the Black Lives Matter movement forward. And today, two of those dynamic individuals have agreed to join us today. Let me introduce them to you. First of all, we have one of our discussants, the speaker, Mr. Kerwin Pittman, who's a member of the Governor's Racial Equity Task Force, which is a 24-member group appointed by Governor Cooper and chaired by Attorney General Josh Stein and State Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls. The task force meets every 2 weeks or so and has 4 focal areas that include police management, law enforcement policies and practices, court interventions, and racial equity in post-trial convictions. Mr. Pittman is the founder and executive director of Recidivism Reduction Education Services, a program that works with high-risk offenders in need of cognitive behavioral interventions and/or substance abuse treatment. He also works with a group called Emancipate NC, an organization that supports North Carolina people as they free themselves from that mass incarceration and structural racism. And it should be noted that he is the mastermind of the Black Lives Matter billboard that we see erected in Pittsburgh, right next to that onerous Confederate flag. And our second discussant today is Mr. Griar Webb, who's a sophomore at UNC Chapel Hill, who's studying political science and African American studies. He is a youth voter ambassador at Making Caring Common. Making Caring Common helps educators, parents, and communities raise children who are caring, responsible to their communities, and committed to justice. He is a commissioner on the UNC Commission for Campus Equality and Student Equity, which is tasked with regulating, producing, and executing actionable policy, recommendations, and ongoing dialogue centered around equal rights, anti-racism, and racial justice on the campus of the university. He's an event organizer at North Carolina Town Hall, and he is co-founder of YAP. Both are organizations designed to promote student engagement in producing positive civic change. So gentlemen, welcome to you both, a warm welcome. We want to give each of you a few minutes to further introduce yourselves and the work that you're doing relative to Black Lives Matter here in the Triangle. And then later on, we will open things up for some dialogue between the two of you and our members here. We hope to have a very relaxed and free-flowing conversation. And so I thought it would be good if we could start with Griar. Are you there? I'm not seeing you on the screen.
Yes, I'm here. Good morning,
okay,
everybody.
There you go.
Can you see me, hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. Thank you very much for identifying. And just tell us a little bit, if you would, about how it is that you came to become interested in and engaged in, the work of, I guess, Black Lives Matter and civic engagement more broadly.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you, everybody, for having me. It's great to see so many smiling faces and so many familiar faces. And so happy Tuesday to you all. I mean, we're living in some serious times right now. So as you alluded to, I am the co-founder of Young Americans Protest, and that came about after the Parkland shooting, actually, in 2018. Some young students, some of you may remember here in Wake County, really came together and put on the town hall for school safety and to reduce gun violence. And we drew out about 800 community members to my high school at the time, Sanderson High School in Raleigh. And we really wanted to focus on and talk about what young people could do to make a difference and to reduce gun violence. And so from there, I founded this organization along with Zainab Baloch, who a few of you may know ran to be the first Muslim mayor of Raleigh last year, and a friend of mine who's at Fordham University in New York, Woody Wise, and he's my age. And we really came together and said, we want to do something more for the North Carolina community. And so those efforts have led me to get involved in the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Poor People's Campaign, and other movements associated with just undoing and uprooting racism in our communities. And so now, being a student at UNC Chapel Hill, many of y'all may have seen on the news yesterday that we're moving online. And so, that was inevitable for me. It is unfortunate. And so we're all in a transition period. So I'm glad this was able to still work out today. And so, like I said, I think it's so important that we begin to uproot these systems of injustice and racism in our communities. And I'm so glad to see so many of you on here today. And I'm really glad to be on here with my brother, Kerwin Pittman. So I won't take up too much time, but just wanted to say, mainly here in Raleigh, here in North Carolina, why it's so important that we make a difference. We all know that we're a battleground state for 2020. We know that it's going to be so important that we vote, our family members vote, and our friends vote. And we have a lot of issues that need addressing here in North Carolina, especially here in Raleigh. And so when we look at the horrible, horrific death of Brother George Floyd that really sparked and kicked off this series of nationwide protests, we had, as Mr. Charles was referring to, a huge protest in March. Over 4,000 people we counted in downtown Raleigh on May 30th. And so I was glad to work with Kerwin, work with others in the community to lead that and to really speak up and say the state of policing here in Raleigh, the state of policing here in the Triangle is not good enough. And we want to not only reform it, but transform it. And so that's a little how I got involved there. It was so empowering to see so many young people, specifically so many white people and non-Black people of color at that march saying that, enough is enough and we demand better. And so continuing those efforts, not only at UNC, but in the professional world and in groups like this, to really just inspire and empower people to understand that they do have power and that this is a time, even in the midst of this other virus, the pandemic of coronavirus, this is a time to speak up and use what voice we have. So thank you. I look forward to the conversation today, and turn it back to you, Mr. Charles.
Okay. And thank you very much, Griar. And we want to also now turn to Mr. Kerwin Pittman. And if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. I understand you're from Raleigh as well. Is that right? And how it is that you began to get engaged in the movement to promote Black lives.
Well, it ain't quite evening yet. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to say it anyway. It's good to see so many smiling faces, as my brother Chris said. Thank you for having me. First off, it's an honor and a pleasure to speak with you individuals. I actually been to one of your rallies outside of Tom Tillis' office. And so I loved it. I loved the energy. I loved everything about it. And so when I was asked to come speak with you guys, I jumped at the opportunity. So my name is Kerwin Pittman. I'm a native of Raleigh, North Carolina, raised in Raleigh, North Carolina. And pretty much how I came to be in the Black Lives Matter movement is I was born into it. And what I mean by born into it is I was born a Black male right now in a racist, broken criminal justice system, especially coming from an impoverished area. I kind of stayed downtown, and we know before gentrification, down what downtown was. If anybody's from Raleigh, so kind of I grew up almost directly a couple blocks from the governor's mansion, and so I was always in it, and didn't really understand back when. In my younger years, I didn't understand how we was affected disproportionately more than any other race of individuals until I actually became enlightened and started to wake up and realize what was going on and see what was happening on the south side of Raleigh, and the southeast side of Raleigh was not going on the north side of Raleigh. And so just being able to put those pieces together, I began to study and research, and of course being impacted by the carceral system, the criminal justice system, at-risk youth. I began to really hone in on my potential and my skills and say, I'm going to use this opportunity to rebuild what I once helped tear down, and which was my community. And so that's one of the great things that I'm doing now. As the great brother Charles introduced me and said, I'm the founder and executive director of REPS. It's called Recidivism Reduction Educational Program Services. And this is an organization that tackles structural bias and racism in the criminal justice system. Particularly, we deal with the carceral system. Individuals coming home post-release parole supervision, help them transition back out successfully. So that is the key to stop the recidivism rate, as well as we get in the front of the pipeline to where we do at-risk diversion programs. We do health and wellness programs as well. I'm also newly appointed to the board of directors for Raleigh PAC, who's been doing a lot of the groundwork for years here in the city of Raleigh for Police Accountability Task Force. I'm on the advisory committee for an organization called Love is a Parable, which it teaches just loving of oneself and empowering of oneself. It's a host. I'm on the governor's task force. I wear many, many hats. But most importantly, I'm a Black male. And no, I'm not saddened or disheartened by being a Black male. I know that my plight and my fight is going to be 20 times harder. Because for one, I'm a male, and for two, because I'm Black, and I understand it. And so this is why I attack the criminal justice system so vigorously. This is why I stay in the fight so adamantly. This is what keeps me up to 3 o'clock in the morning studying police use of force policies. This is what keeps me speaking to individuals who's calling from prison, stopping a meeting to speak with these individuals who call them, because I know that they have a phone slot time. And if they miss that time, they may not be able to call back for the rest of the day. This is why I go as hard as I go, because I've been in their shoes and I know how I feel to be on the other side of the fence. And so I was once told, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so as you could see, especially my people coming from disproportionate positions, we've been on the menu for a long time. So now I'm at the table. So now I seek to bring about change. Hopefully with this task force, we're making recommendations, but not only through that, through my work, most importantly with community engagement. And so I thank you all for being on this call and hearing what we have going on in the Black Lives Matter movement. As my brother Gris said, we formed a coalition called Raleigh Demands Justice. A lot of our organizations was doing the work pre-George Floyd. So we was actually doing the work when Sohail Mujarrad was murdered right here in the city of Raleigh, when Akiel Dinkins was murdered right here in the city of Raleigh, when Keith Collins was murdered right here in the city of Raleigh. We've actually been boots on the ground before George Floyd. And though it is greatly appreciative that we had this renewal of zeal to join this fight after George Floyd's death, I told individuals, once this moment in time and in history pass, once the protesting stops, once the energy dies down, then what? So I always prepped individuals out there at the protesters, and I was out there consistently. I was out there when the statues came down. I was out there almost every day. So I always prepped them for next steps. So next steps is we have to change policy. And though the protesting is good, it is good to get the youth involved, but we must get them engaged now in policy reform and changing the actual structural system that we know and understand that was, first off, it wasn't even built to help individuals in a minority position such as myself. So now how do we do? Do we scrap this whole system and just start from the bottom up, or do we just try to revamp it? The likelihood of us scrapping the whole system would mean we would have to pull a coup d'etat, which would mean we don't possess the economic power to even pull that. So we must go from the inside and change what we can do. And that's one of the ways why I say if you're not at the table, then you're on the menu. And not to take up too much time, but I'm gonna let you.
Yeah, excellent. No, that's an excellent and beautiful introduction. And, you know, I'm going to just grant myself the prerogative of asking the first question, but then from there, open it up to our entire group to ask questions as they occur to them. And I just want to ask each of you, Griar and Kerwin, about your assessment about where we are right now in time. You know, you point out, I think very astutely, that, you know, our attention was galvanized. I guess it was around the 25th of May when Mr. Floyd was murdered on tape, and we could see the video and hear the piercing, agonizing audio of it all. And we also got a chance to see video of what happened with Ahmaud Arbery prior to that, and we've heard about Breonna Taylor prior to that. But I guess it all depends on where you want to start in time. Of course, you could start, you know, 401 years ago if you wanted to, but this problem of policing Black people and Black bodies has been an ongoing problem ever since Black folks have stepped foot on this continent. But so much of the energy right now has been around these more recent events. And Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, just like Minneapolis and Portland and other places around the nation, have had their protests, they've had their triumphs, and they've had their struggles. And I just want to get from each of you your sense about where things are right now. And let's start off with Griar.
Yes, thank you again. I think that we're at a fever pitch. I really think we're at a breaking point here in America, here in Raleigh, here in North Carolina. This is the time for action. This is the time for change. And to your point, Mr. Charles has been building for a while, you know, of course, for centuries, but even more recently, right before George Floyd. And so to see some of the actions or lack of actions that are being taken here at the state level and at the local level, it really shows me that it's time for change and time to continue keeping the pressure up. And that's what we've done here, as Kerwin mentioned, with Raleigh Demands Justice. That's what we've done here across the state with groups like yours. It's time to keep the pressure up. And so I think if we continue working together, continue finding new ways to get at and attack these problems, voting new, fresh ideas, progressive people into office, that's where we're going to get that real change. You know, I like to say that true change equals education plus protest plus policy change. And I believe that a lot of us, especially our white brothers and sisters and non-gender conforming folks, have done those first two or are doing more education and protesting now. And that's great. But now we want to have some pressure put on policy change. And so just keeping with that, and I don't want to get away from the question too much, but I think it's increasingly relevant for this group. And I think I may have mentioned this to Karen before, that it's so important that we talk about the differences and the disparities when it comes to race. And so I like to say this big three, I call it my big three for white people. And so the majority of this group, you know, at least what I'm seeing, happen to be white. That's just a fact. We can accept that and move forward. And so my big three are that, you know, one, white people begin to educate or continue educating themselves and donate to anti-racism groups. I mean, look up and research anti-racism people. Ibram Kendi started a whole anti-racism institute at American University. I just finished reading one of his newest books called Stamped. He's got that famous book that's sold out everywhere now called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And so that education plus donating to local groups here in Raleigh, to statewide groups, is so important. That's number one. Number two, becoming a true ally. And that means bringing up these subjects and not being afraid to be a true ally when you're around your family, your friends, your neighbors, and your coworkers, you know, your colleagues. It's super important that in these professional spaces and in our personal spaces, we begin bringing these issues to the table, that we make it known that we are against racism, that we are against homophobia, that we are against xenophobia, as it's so prevalent around us. And so being that voice to say, you know, I've done the education, I've put my money where my mouth is, and now I want to be this voice to you who may not know as much about the injustice as I do, is so powerful, especially when it comes from white people in our current power structure. The third thing of the big three for white folks, as I call it, is protesting however you can. Obviously, we know we're in an age of coronavirus and of a global health crisis, but to be able to protest not only out in the street as we have a few months ago and will continue to do, depending on what this state and what this city council does in Raleigh, is going to be so important. I mean, you don't have to be on the street protesting. A way that you can protest could be dropping off water next time there's a physical protest. You could protest by speaking up and writing letters to your city council, town council, state legislators, as I know you all do, by calling in. I know Senator McConnell's phone line was mentioned earlier. That's another way of protesting. And so continuing to keep this pressure up while we also fight for policy change is where that true change is going to come. So those are my big three. And I think those tie into your question, Mr. Charles. I know Kerwin surely has some things to add.
Surely. Go ahead, Kerwin.
No, Brother Greer, you hit it dead on the head. So I mean, those are the exact things that I was thinking of. So right now, to answer the first part of your question, right now we're at a fever pitch in time right now to where the elephant in the room cannot be ignored anymore. And so as white people, what I employ individuals to do is to speak up and use your privilege to get in spaces and to say things in spaces and to influence individuals that people of color might not be able to. Don't be afraid. Use your voice and speak up when injustice is occurring, and to make different policy shifts and policy change when injustices is occurring. So another way that you could actually be a big asset and a big help is donating. A lot of people don't know really, unless they're actually out there boots on the ground, that funds is definitely needed to progress a movement and keep a movement going as such. So even the protests that was going on in the city of Raleigh, people do not understand that it takes water. People needed water out there. People needed food out there for their sugar, because in the heat, we know your sugar is going to drop. So people needed food. People needed tents. It was a multitude of different first aid kits that individuals needed. But though, if you wasn't boots on the ground, you might not have thought, wow, these guys been out here been protesting for 7 hours straight. I know they thirsty. And so just seeing clips on the news, you won't get that. So donating is the best cause, but not only to that, but to help and further the movement. So donate to these organizations who are really out here, who are boots on the ground, who are really out here putting the work in locally. And so like I told individuals and nationally, but like I told individuals locally, if you want to see about a change, we're protesting. Yes, we're doing this for George Floyd, which essentially initiated it. But no one understands that we protesting right here in the city of Raleigh is not going to change nothing in Minneapolis. So we have to get involved locally with what's going on locally in your city council. Your local elections are your most important elections. So these are the things that we want to pay attention to and look at and see, okay, well, how do we get behind these progressive individuals who we can support and who's pushing the agenda that's actually for all people? Because we know that Black lives can't matter, and all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. And so I say this all the time. And so, a lot of counter protesters will say, well, all lives matter. And I say, well, I feel the same way, but all lives can't matter until Black lives matter. So are you saying Black lives matter? And so they actually get mad at me, but not to go too much on a tangent and to kind of stick on your question. Another way that individuals can actually help further the movement is pretty much speaking those spaces. And so I'm going to stop right there because I could keep going, but I'm going to stop right there.
Okay, well, yeah, I can see you are ready to roll, and you've been rolling, as a matter of fact. And I want to open this up to everybody, and I want to especially, as we say, privilege the voice of Elena Saverio, because we know that you have been out there doing the work that a lot of us have not been able to get out and do, but you've been out there engaged in the streets at times with the people. And I want to open up to everyone, and particularly Elena, to ask any questions of Riar and Kerwin.
Can I just make one statement?
Absolutely.
White privilege is a double-edged sword. Right? We can use it. We can reach people that are in our circles that are afraid of those people. However, white privilege is also dangerous and can be, as we all know, used for freaking evil. So when people walk in these spaces that are white, always remember the message is Black Lives Matter. So you're not there to take over. You're not there to solve a problem. You're not there. What can I do? How can I serve? You need me to marshal? Fine. You need me to feed you? Fine. Please, please, please remember that white privilege is how you got ahead of people when you were building equity because the system allowed you to. People of color were just trying desperately to build equality. So I'm getting off my soapbox.
Excellent. Excellent. Others?
Cliff, why don't you take the questions that are in the chat?
Oh, all right. Yeah, I've been focusing on the screen here. Let's see. There's a lot that is being written in the chat, and I'm not sure. Can you identify which question you're talking about, Mike?
The first one I think was Mary White. She wants to ask whether the presenters, if they can inform us what the current position is of the North Carolina prison system for inmates to prevent the spread of COVID-19. What is being used to save lives at this moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually going to toss that to Kerwin if he wouldn't mind. I know he's been a little more on the ground recently when it comes to those issues. I'm working with Emancipate NC, and there are huge problems when it comes to Forsyth County and Cumberland County and Fayetteville. And so when we talk about statewide, when we talk about the governor's role in making sure that our inmates are still protected with civil rights and liberties, I think Kerwin is best equipped to answer that.
Yeah, so COVID right now in the carceral system is running rampant, as I put in the chat. So I get phone calls from individuals daily who are telling me, specifically one yesterday from the women's prison, right here in the city of Raleigh, to where they retested everybody. So the state of North Carolina, a lawsuit put against the state of North Carolina prison system by the ACLU and a host of Emancipate NC and a host of other organizations, forced them to update their COVID policies to comply with CDC guidelines, meaning they had to show that there was social distancing in there. They had to show that these individuals had access to PPE, different things of this nature. So they just tested everybody in the prison system, and COVID-19 is now circling back around in there, because it's just a small place that's just recircling around. So 200 individuals that's tested positive, and they're still housing individuals who are testing positive with individuals who are negative. So that means if you didn't have it, ultimately you will end up getting it. Right now, we have a current campaign with Emancipate NC reps and a host of ACLU, a host of other organizations to put together a big push to release these individuals. So North Carolina prison system, DPS, Department of Public Safety, said, well, this is what we're going to do. So we're going to release individuals who fit a certain criteria, and we're releasing a set amount of individuals a month. They put out some type of excuse me, the word is escaping me. They put out some type of scale or survey to say how many people they was releasing. But lo and behold, upon further investigation, this is the number that they release regardless on a regular basis if it wasn't even COVID season. And so we have to be mindful of things like this. So right now, the current status with COVID in the prison system, it is running rampant, and these individuals dire and desperately needs our help because their lives actually depends on it. They can't social distance in there like we can. They can't go lock themselves in them houses when you're in a dorm that house 90-something people, a dorm that house 40-something individuals, and they're still doing transfers from prison to prison. So right now, we're currently in talks with those in position of power, such as Eric Hooks, who's actually chairman of my working group. So I know I see this guy at multiple levels, but that's what you do when you're a freedom fighter. So we're currently in talk with these individuals to try to come up with different ways to hopefully push to release more individuals. Just let them go. let them go. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. I don't know about anybody else, but yeah, I don't. But that's what we got going on right now.
Okay. Now, another question that I see in the chat, I believe is from Liz Evans there. It had to do with the matter of evictions. And you, I think, looked like you began addressing it in the chat. But there was, I think, the observation more broadly that the matter of Black people's engagement with the criminal justice system is tied up in Black people's engagement with multiple systems and the institutionalized problems and discrimination that occur with housing and education and healthcare and so on, and how they all interact with one another. And so I guess it is against that backdrop that the question arose about what, if anything, is being done to assist preparing people for the possibility of evictions. Can either of you speak to that?
Sure, I can speak briefly to that. Like I said, I'm not super ingrained into that space, but I've definitely done some research recently when it just comes to the coronavirus response of North Carolina in general. I know a deadline just passed, and they're still working with the Department of Health and Human Services for some of the understandings. I see in the chat, yes, thank you so much. There's that date, in order that no evictions will be heard prior to August 23rd. After August 23rd, there's going to be a need for a revamp of pressure to be put when it comes to protecting, again, the civil rights and the pursuit of happiness when it comes to those who may possibly be evicted after that date, excuse me. We have worked, I know some of our groups, as well as Kerwin, who sits on that racial equity task force, have spoken with the judicial branch. They've been very, very receptive to what we've had to say. And so while we are focused on police brutality and issues here in the Triangle, we want to make sure that those Triangle residents and citizens have their voices heard when it comes to things that are out of their control, when it comes to this pandemic and when it comes to paychecks and being moved out of their houses. And so we constantly do research and are constantly monitoring that. Again, stay tuned for that August 23rd date. And again, I'll follow up many of these comments in the chat with Karen or with someone else with an email with many of the groups that are issue specific, so that I don't speak over them.
That's great. That's great.
Let me encourage people who are putting things in the chat. The idea here is we want to directly engage Kerwin and Griar with questions. And so feel free to actually articulate those questions here in addition to writing them out. So unmute yourself so that you can speak.
I have a question. I recently retired from a program that worked with women in prison at the maximum security prison. It was a community literacy program. So I would love to hear more about post-release, what's available, particularly for mothers and children, since that's a key primary issue for women in prison. 80% of them are mothers. And if we could just hear more about what's available in Raleigh in particular, that'd be great.
Sure. I'm going to toss that over to Kerwin. Kerwin, do you want to talk a little bit about that and reentry?
Yeah, so I can speak specifically to that. So I just, about a few months ago, about 6 months ago, I just was connected with a lady who runs a nonprofit called Pharaoh's Daughter, to which she actually helped individuals coming home on post-release parole, particularly females and their children, take them in. So what she actually does as well is she actually, if a mother's incarcerated while she have a baby, she actually take care of the baby until the mother come home and actually put her in the program once she's released to actually get her back on her feet. And so it's a great program, and it's right here locally in the city of Raleigh. I think it's right on the outskirts of like Raleigh leading into Durham. But that's the specifics I can get into later. But anybody, please feel free if you have any questions about anything outside of this time space that we do have. Please feel free to reach out to me. I put my my number in the chat, my email in the chat, my website. Please, if you have any questions and I can help direct you and connect you with any type of individuals, then I will. So please feel free to reach out to me.
And the Emancipate NC group is, I think, a particularly strong group when it comes to the matter of bail reform, ending youth confinement, subverting structural racism, and addressing the matter of restorative justice. And so Kerwin's group, Emancipate NC, is one of the mechanisms that's going to address that issue. Thank you. Others?
I have a question for either or both. In terms of donating, which we are, of course, number one on his list, is there, like, I'm pretty crazy about Sherilyn
Eiffel.
Yes, Eiffel, and of course, the work she's doing, and donating to her organization. But is there something better than another that you would throw out in terms of where to do some donating?
Yes, I'm happy to tackle that. Thank you for that. Yes, like I said, education and donation are those two first conjoined pillars of what I like to call my big three for white folks. Just a little bit of a background on me, just so this group can, maybe understand a bit better. My father is an African-American man and my mother is white. And so that gives me a very unique, I like to think, perspective, not only a world perspective, but specifically an American life perspective here. And so having these same conversations with you all that I have, with my family is something that I just want to point out. And so I think it is so important that we just recognize that. And exactly, your point is very well taken. Sherilyn Eiffel is a great idol of mine, and she runs the Legal Defense Fund, for those who may not know, out of the NAACP. I think it's called the Legal Defense and Educational Fund now. And so definitely donating to that is a great first step. To Kerwin's point earlier, donations can get a little tricky because it's up to your personal preference. I highly encourage that you donate if you have a specific issue that you care about or recognize an injustice in, that you donate to a group that tackles that issue. There are many here, and I can list them again in a follow-up email. And I put my contact information if you scroll up. Please reach out to me on social media. I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram, and I can give you those issue-specific organizations that I may choose to donate to. But when it comes to the national level and when it comes to issues of police brutality, of course, the NAACP is a historical group. Ibram Kendi has a list. If you look up, I think if you type into Google Ibram Kendi donation, he has lists of groups that he donates to. Again, that's the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. And, I can't think of any off the top of my head. When it comes to police brutality, Minneapolis had a fund to continue supporting their defund efforts. I know in New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Minneapolis, there's kind of been a revamping in protests. And so to Kerwin's point earlier, people still need water. People still need things on the ground. Movement for Black Lives is an excellent one. I see that in the chat. So any of those, also going to, like I said, Sherilyn or Ibram's pages and looking for some of their lists of groups that they donate to, I'd recommend that. I hope that answers your question. Good.
As well as, and just to chime in, some groups that are here locally, such as myself. So Recidivism Reduction Educational Program Services is a 501c3, meaning that this is tax deductible donations. And I'll put our information in the chat as well as Emancipate NC. Emancipate NC runs a bail fund to which I'm a field organizer for Emancipate NC. And so we actually bail people out of jail, freedom fighters who are actually may got locked up during protests and different things of that nature. Emancipate NC, Raleigh PAC is a good one. Raleigh PAC is another good one. It's a host of Advance Carolina. It's a host of local organizations that I'll be sure to put into the chat, so individuals can make these donations to individuals who are actually locally right here on the ground doing the work locally as well.
Okay. Let me just mention right now that one of the things that's, I think, intriguing has to do with the intersection of our interest as Tuesdays with Tillis and your interest with Black Lives Matter. That has to do with for instance, we all saw what went down in Portland and Seattle and other places. And in those situations, it seemed like there were people who were righteously protesting the matter of police brutality. Then there were other folks who got involved and infiltrated the movement. Some anarchists, some people from the Boogaloo group, et cetera, and some people who just were into just raising a ruckus for whatever their own purposes were, and it's somewhat detracted from the movement. And so I guess one of the things that we've been thinking about, some of us at least, is what would happen if folks like the gangrene people came to the Triangle. What is your sense about the approach, the correct approach to engaging the police, engaging maybe federal forces or National Guard folks when they're out on the streets trying to engage us when we're protesting? Do you have a point of view about how to appropriately deal with law enforcement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can definitely answer the first part, and I would just be speculating about the second part because from my understanding in my conversations, both Governor Roy Cooper and the mayor of Raleigh and the Triangle areas have said they would not, allow federal forces here. But again, who knows what will happen there as we get closer to the election and this, Tangerine in the White House has more tirades. But I'd like to firstly state that when you reflect on this movement since George Floyd and you talk about the violence, or people want to talk about the riots, the true violence started when Officer Derek Chauvin had his knee on George's neck for over 8 minutes. And so that's where the whole conversation needs to be structured around. And so these, media stories, as you alluded to, Mr. Charles, and these, little bits and attacks that, hey, these things are violent and always have been, is just not the case. And to your point, we had Boogaloo and other members of white supremacist organizations downtown in Raleigh when those big protests were happening, and they're on videos kicking in doors and busting glass. Let's not even forget that before those protests were the mainly men, white men with the arms just galore going into the subway. I'm sure many of you saw that viral picture and being so intimidating to a store owner. Guns aren't even allowed in mass group protests under North Carolina law. And so that was allowed, yet the police are saying that they felt threatened by, a multitude of many colors of people on the night of the George Floyd protests. And so, of course, that's unfortunate and wrong and unjust. So to answer your question directly, Mr. Charles, and I think Brother Pittman can definitely go more into detail about how to respond to police who may be aggressive. We know that there were some police, I was down there, Kerwin was down there, that were antagonistic on the night of the George Floyd protests. Most certainly. You can see that in multiple videos. Now, it's very important to state that we need to be cognizant of these things going forward, right? And so if a protest like this were to happen again in that scale, it's important that we reflect on what we can do. And so that's where I would just toss it to Kerwin, as he stayed, I think, a little later than I did on that night and saw some of those antagonistic practices by the police. But I think that's an important question that we should directly address, Kerwin, is as we go through these protests and we have these events of many people and these police coming, in an intimidating way, how do we respond by still being peaceful protesters?
Yes, that's a great question. So the first protest that the city of Raleigh had on the day of May the 30th, me and Greer are actually one of the key organizers of that protest, in which it was an estimate 5,000 individuals showed up to downtown. With protests, you have to be careful, from what I'm learning, of that scale and that magnitude. So the day before the protest, the day of the protest, Raleigh Police Department liaison, a guy by the name of Michael Bowell, gave me a phone call and said, hey, I want you to know that it's individuals who are coming to this protest. We're receiving word that they're coming just to antagonize, to loot and tear up stuff. And I told him, I said, yeah, I was aware, because I got the intel 3 days before he had even called me. and told me about it. And so I said, yes, I'm aware of that. He said, was there anything that you guys need from us, the police, pretty much what he was saying? I said, the only thing we need from Raleigh Police Department is for them not to antagonize individuals, and everything will be okay. And of course, that right there did not happen at all. Once I led the protest in the march around the corner, by the time we came back up by the Justice Building from Fayetteville Street, by the time we came back to the original spot after about maybe an hour, this was not the same crowd that originally started out with me. And so I was aware that it was individuals who was out here just to antagonize and to actually tear down and take from the message of why we was even out here to begin with. And so you had certain individuals in position of power try to make the whole message about property damage versus the real reason we was out there in the first place. And so we cannot get caught up in the distraction and the lies and say that it is property over people, because it is always people over property. Property can be replaced. The people cannot be replaced. A young female about the age of 7 years old, mind you, it was kids in this crowd. She was tear gassed. She was actually hit with, an elderly woman was tear gassed, and the tear gas canister actually burnt her leg. A young woman about the age of 7 years old was actually shot with a rubber bullet. So to shoot rubber bullets in tear gas crowds of innocent people who are just exercising their constitutional rights is totally unconstitutional. And they have the nerve to talk to me about property damage when you actually have severed and scarred this young woman for life, and potentially that's a whole, I'm not even gonna go, but anyway, so I knew that we had individuals coming out to antagonize. So now what we're doing now is we're recruiting more marshals. And marshals are individuals who are at the protests, who stop the traffic, who actually look out for potential individuals who might be of a problem and a threat. And they will actually kind of keep an eye on these individuals, and not to say that they would engage with them if they are to do something to start tearing up a building or start tearing up property. Because I always employ the marshals to not engage with these individuals if they are doing this. Just keep an eye on them to make sure that they are not harming other individuals in the crowd. So this is what we're keeping an eye out for, because as I said earlier, property can be replaced. And though I do not promote at any protest in Raleigh the tearing up of individuals' property, because that's not why we're out there in the first place. But I'm not going to put my life on the line or any other individual's life on the line who are out there with me to stop an individual from tearing up property, because if that's how they want to express themselves, then it is not my job to say, you know what, you can't express yourself in that way. Though I don't agree with it, I'm not about to stop you and say you can't express yourself in that way. So my main thing is when I'm at these protests is I look for individuals who are potential threats to the crowd. So we know and understand that at these protests, it is a great chance and likelihood to where you can have mass casualties for individual groups such as the Proud Boys, who was in attendance at our protests. But my team kept a close eye on these individuals. And so I look for these type of individuals. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the police job and we're policing our own community. Right? Because we keep us safe. The police don't keep us safe. We keep us safe. And so that's one of the main things that we're doing from now on at these protests and at these rallies.
And Karen, I
want to jump in here because thank you for everything you just said. Clearly the looting that's been going on is the looting of Black people by white people for 400 years. And we understand that. And we also understand who the peaceful protesters are. I'd like to invite both of you to join us. We have petitioned Ready the Ground. You know about them. They're a wonderful martial organization, a nonviolent resistant organization. And they're going to be doing a training for Tuesdays with Tillis so that we can join your marshals and be trained to do it. And I'd like to invite both of you it's going to be a Sunday in September. I'll send you the link and then you could invite people. We have been good at a certain kind of street protest. But if Trump contests the election, all kinds of shit could come down. And we want to be ready for that. And we're not going to be leading that. We're going to be following young leaders and especially Black and brown leaders in that. Today, there was an article about how protests to really resist the Trump administration have been harder to attract people than the Black Lives Matter protest. But I'd be really interested in your thoughts about what I just said. And also, don't you think maybe we could get like hundreds of thousands of people on the street so that we could be safe and keep each other safe in the event of a coup by Trump?
Yes, that's a great question, Karen. If I could just speak to those points quickly and want to be respectful of everyone's time. Firstly, the martial piece is very important. Okay, I want everyone to recognize and understand that the peaceful, nonviolent marshals is so important. Kerwin had many stationed at the event in downtown Raleigh, and the North Carolina Central University Law School reached out to me a few months ago and said that they were beginning to train their students, their law school students, in becoming peaceful marshals as we move closer to November. So that work is being done and should continue to be done. And so I'd love any information you can send me on that, Karen, that we can blast out. Also, when it comes to policing and when it comes to what the governor and what city councils can do, I'm just reading through the chat now and I see a comment about the governor's office and I saw a comment about city council. Just want to take a brief moment of personal privilege here to state out for Raleigh folks, Chapel Hill folks, Durham folks who may be looking to Raleigh for leadership on this. Raleigh actually just as of this year instituted a police oversight board. It's called the Raleigh Police Advisory Board, and I'm the youngest member on that board. And so right now we don't have any power to investigate officers, to hear community grievances, to subpoena anyone, or to recommend fruitful policies. All we are there to do is really just look through the policies that are online, which I can do from this bed behind me. And so when we talk to these leaders, we want to talk to them about substantial ways to act. And so these comments, as it pertains to college reopening, as it pertains to other acts of injustice, as it pertains to Donald Trump, we really need to hold our leaders accountable with tangible, substantial action. And so again, for that third way of protesting, specifically for our white brothers and sisters, to be able to call up or email the governor's office, call up or email, the mayor of Raleigh and say, this isn't good enough. We've heard from people involved and we want to take their lead, to Karen's point, and this is not good enough for change. We really need transformation of police, or we really want everyone on the task force, everyone that wants to be trained in nonviolent marshaling to have that at a state level. And so it's so important that we continue to hold them accountable with specific policies that these groups on the ground are recommending. And so circling back to the Marshall point, I don't know if Kerwin had anything to add, but just circling back to the Marshall point, that is a super important point. I know that people in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill areas are looking into that and are training, but I'd love to see that become more widespread. So I'll follow up with you, Karen, with information regarding that.
And to just piggyback off what Chris said, the Marshall point and the Marshall training is definitely needed. So if you could please send me the link as well so I could blast it out to my list of individuals as well. And I just want to say one thing before the time get out here, because I want to be sensitive to everybody's time. I know you guys are probably hearing a lot about defunding the police. And so a lot of individuals do not have a real strong grasp of what we mean by defund the police. And so I wanted to clarify and clear it up with everybody. So when we speak of defunding the police, we speak of a reallocation of funds. We do not speak of just equipping them, taking all their money and equipping them with sticks and stones to fight crime. Though we know and understand that it would still be crime, and though we know and understand that it does not take militarized weapons to be used against the own people who you are sworn to protect and serve, particularly those in the minority community. So when we say defund the police, we mean a reallocation of funds. So we're going to take some of these militarized weapons, the money for this militarized weapon that you're receiving, and we're going to put these into social services, such as an organization called Cahoots, or organization called STARS, to which as it actually deploys a social worker, a medic, to a scene in a van versus calling the policeman when somebody's dealing with a crisis situation. And so we know that when law enforcement deal with individuals with a crisis situation, it's more likely that they will be killed. So this is what we mean by a reallocation of fund, and this is a short synopsis of really what we mean by defunding the police. Not equipping with sticks and stones. We mean just a reallocation of funds to different places that actually work.
Wow,
that's a great. If I could just piggyback quickly, I was just going to say very quickly to Michael Eisenberg's point, as well as from Chapel Hill, the comment, there used to be a peer mediation training in middle school and high school so that peers could really serve as friends and comrades to their fellow peers. That is not a program that we have in Wake County anymore. I'd like to see that brought back. But to Kerwin's point today, here's a perfect example of how we can all get involved for those that live in the Triangle community. We have made recommendations. We actually made a list of 7 demands to Raleigh when it comes to policing and police reform and transformation. One of those demands was a separate mental health unit that could respond to issues of homelessness or mental crisis when a weapon is not involved. Instead, today, this evening, Raleigh will be voting to create a police homelessness unit and a police mental health unit that will respond officers with their firearms and in their uniforms to respond when homeless people are in crisis, even if they don't have a weapon. And so, of course, I'm seeing, head shakes and hands up. How ridiculous is that? It's not what the community's been asking for. It's another example to me of how this, soft liberalism continues to pervade some of our most diverse cities. And so a way that you can get involved after this meeting later today is send an email to all of the Raleigh City Councilors. I'm not sure of their website, but I'm confident you all can find it, and email them and say no to it's called the Police Homelessness Mental Crisis Unit. And you just say no. You can say that the Raleigh Demands Justice Coalition has been opposed to that and gave you an alternative, and this is not what communities of color need to see. You can also do a social media storm for those that are on social media, and find ways to tag them using the @ symbol on your phone, and tag all of the Raleigh City Councilors. They have Twitter. You can say, I was in a meeting and heard this was going down tonight, and I'm opposed. And so those are the ways that you can take those really small actions and those really small ways that these leaders say, hey, we're providing something for the homeless. We're providing something for those in crisis. And, it's not our usual response. So that's good enough. And to really stand up and say no. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Karen, but I just think that's an important point that needs to be made. And that's something that we can do right now. There it is right there in the chat. City of Raleigh.
Tonight. It's tonight. Wow, the time has just sped by, and already we're now at 12:30 and we've got to wrap things up. But I can't tell you how grateful we are to Griar and Kerwin for just sharing so much of your knowledge and your passion and your vision for how it is that we can promote the liberation of Black people and promote Black lives. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the contributions that you've made today. And we're going to be looking forward to continuing to engage you in the future. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all for having us.
You'll come back. We're going to be, I hope you'll join us if you can for our closing song and closing. That's been our habit for 186 weeks. So we're going to do that. But I really hope that you'll come back. You're both amazing, and thank you.
Thank y'all.
So we can all mute ourselves, and Michael Flaherty's going to lead us in Vote 'Em Out.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Cliff. And the liberation of Black lives is the liberation of all of us. If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. That's what election day is all about.
How we got is called the ballot box.
If you don't like who's in there, vote them out. Vote them out, yeah, vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. We'll bring some great ones in, and they'll find us hope again. Because we don't like never mattered quite like this. And lies and get the White House sanitized. That nasty virus must be voted out. We're in the streets and we're holding strong. Putin and Trump and boyfriends much too long. Let's end deceit and fraud. Restore the rule of law. Lift up our cries of truth and vote them out. Vote them out. Yeah, vote them out. And when they're gone, we'll sing and dance and shout. We'll vote the blue ones in and set things right again. 'Cause our lives depend upon this, vote 'em out. 'Cause lives depend upon this, vote 'em out.
Yes, lives depend.
Everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week. I'll be out of town next week.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you all. Thank you so much to
Kerwin and Griar and Cliff. I read recently that as much as we need oversight, we need undersight as well. Undersight. A chance to step back and understand more deeply what is going on. And we have received some undersight today. So thank you. And as we continue on our struggle for Black lives, our struggles for freedom, I read that, Kerwin, that you, sometimes when you feel like so much is going on and you need to kind of regain your focus, you go and stand by that statue of Martin Luther King in Raleigh and just take a moment. Take a moment. And thank you for that. Because if we're going to stay in this freedom struggle for the long haul, we all need to take a moment and stand by those who have gone before and draw our strength from those who have struggled in other generations. There's an ancient indigenous belief that I've been thinking about. The Sami people believe that Earth is a kind of a mirror where those who have gone before are actually standing upside down, and we are standing, our feet are on their feet. So soul to soul, S-O-L-E, to soul. Over generations, over centuries, we are standing on those who have gone before. So as we settle in and distill and take in all that we have just heard and been inspired by this past hour, perhaps all of us can go and stand in a place that gives us strength for the long journey, that we might be the ancestors that we want to be to those who come after us, and that we might march on in the near and distant future, knowing that we are part of the long arc of the history for freedom and justice. So forward together.
Not
one step back. Forward together.
Not
back. Absolutely.
Bless you all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so
Be well.
much.
Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I don't have your email address, put it in the chat before you go.
I'm gone. Again. Down and I'll take. Thank you.